I feel like, I've been kind of complaining about the Democrats a little bit, and I complain about Biden, and I whinge about how I don't really feel like I should have to vote for him because I live in Kansas and it doesn't matter if I vote for a Democrat here. Do you ever feel like you're watching the Democrats do something and you feel like, I don't understand why you're doing what you're doing? You're like, I don't understand. I wish that I understood why you are seemingly trying to fail. Like, why are you doing none of the things that you promised to do? Or like, why are you doing this thing that the Republicans want to do? Just constantly, why are you not raising the minimum wage? They decided based on some random person being appointed that they couldn't even talk about the federal minimum wage when Biden first got into office. Like, you know what I mean? He's been in office for like 3 years, and there has been absolutely no conversation about the federal minimum wage. And groceries cost like almost twice as much this year as they did last year. So, yeah. Anyway, we've been wondering, like, that's part of where my frustration comes from. And I'm sure a lot of you have the same frustration where you're just sitting there going, what are you doing? Like, you don't understand their behavior. Like, it's maddening. Why? Why? So we're going to listen to this guy explain it. What is your name? This guy's channel is called Watchful Coyote over on TikTok. And this is the only video of his I've ever seen. And we're going to enjoy it and react to it together. Hey, real quick. Hit the like button if you're enjoying the content. Hit the subscribe button as well and turn on all notifications. And also take a moment to check out the links in the description for merchandise and Patreon, where you can find exclusive free content. Strap in.
So the role of the Democrats in the current system is to intentionally lose. I hope you'll let me explain, because as we navigate the tricky intersectional ethics of the upcoming 2024 election and beyond, it's important that we begin to understand this in our bones.
Okay, so just to be clear, that is... Do I need to take him down to 0.75 speed? Maybe I need to take him down to 0.75, because he just goes on so fast. That was 10 seconds. And he said, here's my thesis. The Democrats are trying to lose. Democrats are just a very mild form of damage control at this point. Yeah.
50 years ago, the U.S. had two political parties, Republicans and Democrats, and both had genuine public support, and both platforms held some public appeal. And then the right wing realized that there was unimaginable money to be made from corporate campaign funding. So they abandoned their entire platform and dedicated themselves completely to allowing the exploitation of the environment and the working class to give every single penny to the ultra-rich. Paid really well, but there was no way they were going to win elections with that as a platform, because it amounted to a giant middle finger to the working class and their voter base. So they needed to mobilize a new voter base. They looked at a few options and settled on evangelical fundamentalist Christians who were previously pretty apolitical.
Yeah, so it's, you know how the Republican Party didn't used to be insane? They made a deliberate choice to be insane so that they could get away with, like, primarily just doing things that work with corporate funding, you know? Yeah, and he goes into this. He goes into detail more of, like, what kind of things the Republican Party has changed on in the years since, like, Reagan, I guess. Like, you know, at what point did we start focusing more on making huge amounts of money? And by that, like, yeah, we're going to focus on the lobbying and not really worry about the policies.
In order to buy their votes, the Republican Party turned on a dime in the 1980s and became rabidly pro-life. Before this, the Republicans were openly pro-choice because abortion is a personal right, and they were the party advocating personal rights. This marked the start of the modern culture wars, where the right invents boogeymen to terrify their base into ignoring the fact that their entire platform is basically steal all your money and give it to the rich, while destroying the environment we live in.
Yeah, let's steal all your money while destroying the environment. Like, if you look at what these parties actually do, you don't have to read their platform. You can deduce what their actual platform is by looking at all of their behaviors. You can infer, based on what they do, what it is that they want to do. And that is repeatedly, like for Republicans, give their rich buddies tax cuts, you know, make policy that requires, you know, infrastructure changes that happen to only benefit this, like, one particular manufacturer. The GOP has literally decided to go full fascist and get rid of democracy completely. I mean, yeah, because democracy is not profitable. They can't keep making money if they have to worry about campaigning. Campaigning costs money. If you don't need to campaign anymore, then there's no need to spend money on it. Like you get to just concentrate power, concentrate money.
The Democrats quickly followed suit, starting with Clinton. They also abandoned any actual representation of their base for corporate cash grabs, including massively lucrative arms deals and warmongering in order to funnel billions through the Pentagon into their corporate funders' pockets. So the only two major political parties in the most powerful country in the history of the world both completely sold out to corporate interests some 30 to 40 years ago, which has led to an ever-widening gap between public opinion and legislation. For example...
Yeah, like I was reading recently that there was a staffer, speaking about the Israel-Palestine thing, there was a staffer recently that said it's, there's always a difference between the public opinion and what's going on within the congressional body, but this is like the greatest schism that this particular person has seen. And I'm like, why is it normal for there to be a gap between what is popular in public opinion versus what is happening in the congressional body? The whole fucking point is that it's a representational democracy. You're supposed to have like a representative who then votes the way that you want them to. So why should there be a difference between public opinion and what's going on in the Congress? And it's fundamentally telling you that the system is broken. I mean, maybe it's working completely as intended because, the power is being siphoned up and up and up, and maybe someone was really thinking ahead on that one and did it on purpose. But maybe it is just an exploit of the system. So it happens that we wanted it to be representative democracy, but the ways in which we have been trying to formulate that can be twisted around, like the gerrymandering, right? And then, all you have to do is like appoint a conservative judge who wants more conservatives to be pushed through, and then they'll just like not be critical of conservatives. They'll put more conservatives on. They'll rule this way more conservatively, and like in a way that ends up making, again, a few rich people even richer. I have to explain this to liberals in my family a lot. They're only capable of viewing every issue individually and taking politicians at their word on their motivations. Yeah, but yeah, again, so this guy, he's going to continue outlining, like, what are they trying to actually accomplish? Do their actions make more sense if you reframe what their actual goal is?
Polling shows that some 70% of Americans have wanted some form of universal health care for decades, but it's barred from even being seriously discussed. Mm-hmm. Citizens of the U.S. are shockingly aligned on most major issues. We all want the rich to pay taxes, not to watch our neighbors and families die from easily preventable medical issues, living wages, fair elections, breathable air, and not bombing of babies. Corporations want the exact opposite, or more accurately, they want the record-breaking profits they can extract from the opposite. This creates a real quandary for both Republicans and Democrats alike. How do you continue to get votes while aggressively working against everything your voters want?
That's an amazing question. Like, how do you win elections if your goal is to do a bunch of stuff that is counterintuitive to what people actually want? And usually we go, oh yeah, it's gerrymandering. And like, oh, it's this, and it's closing the polling stations. Like, it's more insidious than you think.
You already know the answer. They stage a farce where they pretend to be bitter enemies, and like any abuser, they both claim that they are the only ones who can keep you safe from the other. The Republicans pretend that they are the only thing preventing straight white Christians from being hunted for sport by hordes of black and brown trans drug dealers screaming pronouns and making up new genders.
True.
The Democrats pretend that they are the only ones who can save you from the coal-guzzling fascists literally storming the Capitol. Mm-hmm. The fact that one boogeyman is totally fictional and the other is very real doesn't change their tactical exploitation and the presentation of themselves as your only hope at all. And they've gotten really good at this dance.
I think that's an interesting point. It's like, I think that folks keep hammering in this idea that we really need to make sure to vote for the Democrats because if the Republicans get in power, then they're going to do such and such. And, he's pointing out that just because one of the claims being made, where like, the Republicans are claiming that the Democrats want to eradicate Republicans. Not the case. Democrats are claiming that Republicans want to use our democracy. They actually do. But like in this particular system, tactically, it doesn't matter whether or not either of those threats are real because they're both being used to create this like, oh, I'm your only hope.
They do a great job at it now. They look genuinely enraged at each other as they denounce the other side of the aisle while all of them vote unanimously for the same tax cuts for the rich and bloated military budgets.
Dude.
And genocides that line their funders' pockets.
True.
The Republicans have it easy. Their platform of culture war has no relationship to their corporate funders, so when they get into office, they can do most of what they say they will. They'll criminalize abortion, defund social services, cut taxes, but only on the rich, never for you, institute a brutal police state, terrorize
Oh
immigrants.
my God, taxes. I was looking up, like, has the tax policy changed under Biden yet? Like, are the taxes going to suck less next year? Because last year they sucked so bad.
LGBTQ people. The Democrats have a real problem, though. Their nominal platform is at odds with their corporate sponsors, so they do the only logical thing from that position. They intentionally lose. Every time they make a catch, win an election, they intentionally fumble the ball. We're all so used to seeing this farcical dance that we can't even really register it anymore, but the Democrats have had the Senate, House, and presidency simultaneously multiple times in the last few decades.
I've been saying this. People keep going, oh, the Democrats, you got to keep voting for the Democrats. But it's like, fucking why? Even when they have all the power, they have both houses, like they have the House and the Senate and the fucking presidency, and they don't do anything. Like, what? Why? Like the Biden impeachment, it's all about obfuscation. It doesn't matter that Trump's impeachment has merit and Biden's doesn't. The discourse is simply, oh yeah, well, Biden is being impeached too. They do not have the House. I'm not saying now. I'm saying in the last, like on the screen here, he's saying in the last few decades. In the last few decades, like with Roe, you know, people keep saying like, you know, we need to vote for Democrats because whatever, blah, 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 abortion, right? They kept campaigning on the idea that they were going to enshrine Roe versus Wade into law. And over the last few decades, in the 50 years since Roe was originally made into precedent, they've had numerous opportunities to be like passing this law that they keep claiming that they're going to do, right? So, but they've exploited us by being like, okay, we're going to do this. Just keep voting for us. Just keep donating to us. We'll do this thing. And then they just keep not doing it because obviously, if they do it, like, first of all, that might be against whatever interests they're actually serving. But also, they can't keep campaigning on it and saying, donate to us. Like, the donations to Democrats went up dramatically right after Roe v. Wade was destroyed because a bunch of them used it as a campaign opportunity to be like, yo, if you donate money to me now, then we'll win the next election and we will fight back on Roe. We will pass legislation. Like, bro, it's all just silly. It's all just silliness at this point.
Decades. At any one of those times, they could have actually made change. They could have codified Roe versus Wade. They could have passed legislation eliminating all student debt. They could have cut military spending, taxed the rich, passed universal health care. They could have capped emissions and maintained a livable environment. Our country and world could be very, very different than it is. It really doesn't have to be like this. But if they did those things, they would then gain massive public support and actually run the country, but they would lose all their corporate funding. So that's not actually what they want. So they keep this incredibly fragile balance, where since the Clinton years, where the Democrats sold out, the balance of power has been carefully maintained at almost exactly 50-50.
Yeah, you know, it's not just the Democrats, it's not just the Republicans gerrymandering that is like maintaining this perfect 50-50 balance. If the Republicans gerrymandering, if their goal was to have an overwhelming majority, they would have an overwhelming majority at this point. Like, it's been carefully crafted at 50-50, and I could believe that it is intentional on both of their parts to keep it just exactly at this level where nobody can actually fucking accomplish anything. Yeah.
Giving both parties the ability to point the finger and blame the other for not getting anything done. It didn't used to be like that. The party that better represented the will of the population used to just win and then do what the people wanted. Like the 75th Congress, some 90 years ago, was 344 to 88. Because the Democrats, who held the 344, maintained a 95% tax on the rich.
That's crazy. Like 344 members versus what, like 88 members? It turns out that if Democrats actually do the things that they're supposed to do, like, and when they were in power and they were doing those things, it was like a cyclical thing. They were in power because they were doing the things that people wanted to do. They were reliably doing the things that they had been voted into place to do, and they were like, okay, cool. You know? And so they kept winning and they kept doing the things people were asking for, but that's not profitable. Doing what people want you to do for their betterment of their lives is not profitable, and that's the fundamental problem with the whole thing.
Rich and actually subsidize social services and education. If today's Democrats simply adopted the platform of their own party from 90 years ago, they would win every election in a landslide. But they actively don't want to win. For many of us millennials, this was really driven home by the 2016 election cycle. Polls were crystal clear. In every single poll, Bernie Sanders beat Trump by double digits and Hillary Clinton lost to Trump. The DNC pulled out all the stops. They lied, cheated, stole so much in order to force Sanders out and put Clinton up as the candidate that it was impossible not to see it. It looked insane to many of us. We felt crazy. I remember literally watching them
I wasn't like a Bernie bro at the time, so I don't know. Like, I'm not really sure. I know that they really did him dirty, but it's like, yeah, was it because they just wanted Hillary to lose? Was it because, yeah, because again, the corporate interests, if Bernie Sanders wins and he actually helps things become less corporatized, less industrialized, we try to pass legislation that's going to help the environment, that is going to hurt profits. And so Democrats who are friends with these people who make a lot of money off of the climate being all out of control, like, their, endless production of goods and services that are harmful to the environment, like, it is their incentive to prevent Bernie from getting in. So again, I wasn't really paying that close of attention to this specifically at the time, but it would make sense to me perfectly that this was intentional. 2016 was my first election, and seeing the way that all went down pushed me left so fast. Yeah, I feel like the past 7 years have been a fever dream. Like, I don't really remember the details of what was going on in 2016. It was a bad time for me personally.
Sanders delegates out for asking questions that they didn't want to answer at the Democratic National Convention in Maine. I remember watching them shut down polling places where Sanders had strong leads. All the things that the MAGA thinks happened in the 2020 election, the DNC literally did and didn't even bother to hide in 2016. They were taken to court for it, and they didn't even deny that they rigged the primary. They just said, hey, we're a private company. We're under zero obligation to run fair elections. We can nominate whoever we want. The voting is just a farce. That was their legal argument, and they won with it.
But in game theory terms, their stated win state is different than their actual win state. They win via billions in corporate blood money, even while losing elections and selling the country into fascism. Yeah, their stated win state is different than their actual win state.
I remember hearing people scream at the DNC officials, do you want to lose? And slowly understanding that, yeah, that was exactly what they wanted. They would literally rather lose with Clinton than win with Sanders. Because when they lose, they can then say, gosh darn it, we tried, but they won this round. Please donate more. They get to look like the good guys who keep trying but just keep getting beaten down by the forces of fascism and racism and hate. As losers, they're noble victims, but when they win, they have real problems like what we're seeing now with Biden, where they have to try and hide the fact that they are also the forces of fascism and racism and hate.
More precisely, they are conscious accomplices to and proxies for the forces of corporate fascism and lucrative hate. This is what I've been trying to say for a while. Like, this is what I understand the phrase cut a liberal and you'll see a fascist bleed means, is they pretend to be ideologically opposed to the fascism and the authoritarianism and the hatred and the bigotry and stuff, but they are profiting off of those things. And it's really unbelievable at this point. You can't say that you care about racism and police brutality and fucking increase police budgets across the country. Like, you just can't. You can't do that. It's so obvious at this point. It's painfully obvious that there is no party of the people at this point. This dude looks like my American ex, so I want to hate him, but he's not saying anything wrong, so I can't. Rip. So sorry.
If Trump had won, he'd likely be doing the exact same thing, but it would be normal. We'd all expect it, and the DNC would fundraise like crazy. When a Democrat commits genocide, though, we're supposed to see it as atypical. Unflinchingly committing genocide is supposed to read as, oh, a little oopsie from an otherwise ethical, humanitarian, democratic leader.
Yeah.
The fact that the Republican platform doesn't interfere with their corporate interests and therefore they can enact the policies they promise to, while the Democrats have to constantly appear to fumble and fail in their oh-so-genuine efferts to create change has...
That's what I mean, again, about the Senate parliamentarian. The Senate parliamentarian who allegedly was the reason that they can't even entertain a bill about increasing the federal minimum wage. Do you guys remember that shit? Like, they just had to pretend like they couldn't do anything.
Of course, led to the rightward drift of U.S. politics over the last decades, to the point where Republican elected officials are now openly saying out loud that we should kill all Palestinians, while the House just voted near unanimously that anyone who says we should not commit genocide must be anti-Semitic. That shift is noteworthy. If any politician had stood up and publicly said that we should kill all of a given race 50 years ago, they would have rightfully been called a Nazi and lost all public credulity. Today, that's accepted on the floor of a state house, while opposing genocide is condemned and literally censured. That's pretty intense, and it's like that across the board. The only thing that matters in political discourse is controlling the parameters of the narrative. What is outside the bounds on each side? If you control...
this is the Overton window he's explaining. Like the bookends of what is normal to talk about. So like, you know, if the world were normal, then the normal window would be like, on one end we're discussing paying more taxes to schools, and on the other end we're talking about paying more taxes to the military, right? Sure, that's like a, you know, somewhere in the middle. That's like a normal conversation. But like it's being pulled more this direction, where it's like more money for schools doesn't ever get talked about, and it's not only more money for the military, but it's like money to specifically go to a country that is causing genocide. Like, you know, it's drifted away, where we're talking about like how much money do we give to the military, and never talking about how much money we're giving to the schools.
Roll these two bookends, then the content of what is said in between them becomes wholly irrelevant. Both bookends have been steadily shifting to the right for a long time, to the point where now right-wing politicians openly advocate ethnic cleansing, and left-wing politicians just quietly fund ethnic cleansing. And anything to the left of funding ethnic cleansing is literally censured.
Yep.
Remember how 100 years ago the Democrats controlled like 80% of Congress and they taxed the rich at 95% in a way that gave the U.S. the strongest economy in the history of the world? Now, if any elected official is crazy enough to suggest that the rich should pay any taxes at all, they're labeled as communists and laughed out of the room. So I paid more taxes than Jeff Bezos last year. The cost of living's through the roof, federal minimum wage is still $7.25, and we're watching our tax dollars bomb babies. But the Democrats, who are currently the ones bombing babies, are our saviors. And if we just vote for them a little bit more, then they'll save us all.
How are they supposed to be our saviors? Yeah, when they are doing the shit that we don't want them to be doing, like that we don't want any of these people to be doing. How are they supposed to protect? Yeah, I love that as a Jew, my views in America are deemed anti-Semitic, when in reality, I am against the genocide of those that live on and share a sacred area of land and protect my Palestinian brothers. Right. Like, plenty of Jewish folks in America are anti-Zionist, and being anti-Zionist is now being equivocated with being anti-Semitic, and therefore, like, a bunch of Jewish people are allegedly anti-Semitic now? No.
Most notable in all of this is that if anyone speaks up who actually represents the will of the American people, they're mocked and driven out of the conversation. So people like Claudia de la Cruz or Cornel West are effectively barred from any presence in the mainstream media, or if they are covered, it's as an anomaly and immediately condemned as stealing votes from the real candidates. Notice that framing. It's not that Biden or Trump are losing through their complete failure to represent anything like what the people want. It's that anyone who represents what the people want is stealing votes from them.
Yeah, like they're entitled to the votes is part of the feeling that you have. Like that if you're a progressive, Biden is entitled to your vote is part of what has created this problem here.
I'd like to understand the mechanisms and expressions of this political narrative of control better. I can't recommend Chomsky enough. Since reading his masterwork, Manufacturing Consent, a propaganda model of the media, I have never seen the world the same way. That book is dense, but he covers the same content in a much more digestible fashion in the 1988 CBC Massey lectures titled Necessary Illusions, which is also in print as a book by the same name. But that's a 4-hour lecture set from 35 years ago, and it's worth every second. But don't take my word for it. Just watch and look at the track record. If the Democrats wanted to win...
He says, before you start commenting about how we have to vote for Biden to avoid fascism, please watch the previous vid, Democrats, and also consider how continuing to support Democrats is what is leading toward the right wing, leading to the rightward drift towards fascism.
They do what 75% of the country wants and stop funding genocide and enact a ceasefire. But they're doing the exact opposite, and it may very well have the effect of putting Trump back into office. As you watch that play out, or whatever the next scenario is where the Democrats fail or look wildly inept, just remember this video and compare what you're seeing to the idea that they want to lose. If they wanted to win, we all know how they could. They're not doing that. So ask yourself what priorities would lead to their actual ineffective course of action, and whether those priorities align with yours, your neighbors, and those of everyone who wants a safe, livable world.
Yeah. Yep. It's like he was just spitting bars the whole time. What the hell are we supposed to do then? I'm not saying I have the answers, okay? Like, I'm sure what you are going to do is vote for Biden. It's probably still the best harm reduction option, but it also means that you need to be campaigning for, like, a ranked voting system, or, like, showing up to people's houses and getting pissed off and, like bothering them in restaurants and stuff. Like, what I'm trying to demonstrate with this is that what is happening now is not working. And this is the beginning of, like, we need to start having some conversations about what else we're going to do. You know? Like, I don't have the answer for what the hell we're supposed to do. I think the thing that we're supposed to do now is have a realistic conversation about what the alternatives are, you know? Like, what do you do if the government is no longer representing you even though it's supposed to. As a former harm reduction worker and public health researcher, I support your message. Like, yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but I think that we need to wake more people up to this idea that, if you feel confused by the actions of the Democrats, it might be because, this exact thing. Of course they can't pass a federal minimum wage increase. Of course they can't even entertain that discussion if all of their corporate buddies are going to be pissed off about the fact that they have to pay more now, the fact that it's going to cut into their profit margin, which is always the case. It's cutting into the profit margin. Mersh says, get involved in local and state politics where you can make a difference. Also monitor school board meetings and beware of local hate churches, etc. Yeah, I will definitely second the whole monitor school board meetings thing, because with that, we actually had a ton of folks who work with these hate groups like Moms for Liberty trying to get into the school boards across the country, and a lot of them lost. Voting for what feels like the least violent option. Be aware of local politics, as you can make direct change faster there, and then that change can move up. Yeah, to the extent that you can, get involved even on the years where it's not a major election year. Pay attention to whether there's a vote happening in August as well as the one happening in November. Local stuff. And then also, yeah, be prepared to be talking about the possibilities of okay, if this government seems mostly invested in perpetuating itself for the purposes of making as much money as possible, is that really reflective of our goals? And what do we do if it turns out that the way that this government is being run and the bureaucratic resistance to change that has been built into it, if that continues to result in human suffering and death, how long do we tolerate that before we demand that the government fundamentally change or dissolve itself? I think is ultimately what it comes down to. At a certain point, we have to revoke the government's legitimacy and say, we are no longer acknowledging this. We are going to, reform things or start from scratch or whatever, but y'all don't have a job anymore. None of y'all have a job anymore. We're going to figure something else out. When I visited my best friend in Canada, I was shocked at how cheap the groceries were. They politically enacted grocery price controls. Dems could have done that. It's frustrating that they are our only choice because of this system in place. Why do you think it would result in a civil war if we say to the government, you are no longer effectively doing your job and you need to fix that? Do you think that the government would then violently suppress the people saying, hey, we need to reform this? Is that what you think? Because that means that's not a civil war, babe. That's just fascism. And if you think that that's what would happen if the people went to the government and said, you need to change how things are going, if that's what you think would happen, then we already live in a fascist nation, don't we? Citizens for Liberty is based in my small town. Oh, that's fucking rough. That's how I feel being anywhere near Kansas, or not Kansas, being anywhere near Topeka because of the Westboro Baptist Church. I'm so embarrassed to be from anywhere near Topeka. State elections are important because the GOP want to use Article 5 of the Constitution to eliminate our current Constitution. I know that they've been trying to get the Constitutional Convention. I don't know what Article 5 is. I would have to read into this more detailed. I feel like that was a good little conversation about the Democrats and how they're losing on purpose. That was fun. Mersh has sent an article about Article 5 convention. Under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, Congress is required to hold a constitutional convention if 2/3 of state legislatures, 34 states, call for one. Here's the catch: there are absolutely no rules for an Article 5 convention outlined in the Constitution, which means that the group of people convening to rewrite the Constitution could be totally unelected and unaccountable. Yeah, so there's apparently no provisions for what would happen, who is writing the new rules to the Constitution. Those are potentially unelected people. Yeah, I think that that's the point of what Mersh is saying, that if we got a constitutional convention right now, they would literally just write a fascist constitution, There's no rules about what amendments they're allowed to write or not. That's kind of the point, I think. Right now, there are 4 major campaigns for an Article 5 convention: the Balanced Budget Amendment campaign, the Convention of States campaign, the Wolfpack campaign, and the Term Limits campaign. Each has different goals, but together they've convinced 28 states to call for a convention. They have just 6 states to go. That's a huge number of states already. So yeah, I'm not going to look into much more detail about that right now, but I know that they've been trying to make a constitutional convention happen for a while. Like, they've been talking about it for a year or two, actually. Hi, thank you so much to all of my patrons, especially Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvog, Amanda B., Michelle Frateroli, Michelle Winter, Wellington Marcus, Danielle McDonald, DZXN, Suzanne Maynard, Spooky Heather Sylvia, Jamie Jam, Pasnell Infinity, Nova, Elizabeth Bartell, Sojo, Sarah A., Athiet, Kevin Young, Celeste, Desi Quiche, Liam Hodgson, Mr. Atheist, and Ella V. Nobody.